Today, we are talking about the kind of combat that completely rewires your brain, where every fight feels rewarding, every decision matters, and before you know it, you've lost an entire weekend. And this list is going to make your wish list a whole lot longer. Let's get into it. Astral Chain has one of the most addictive combat systems ever put on a Nintendo console. And I mean that. Platinum Games, the studio behind Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising, built something here that once it clicks, you physically cannot put the controller down. You're not just fighting enemies, you're fighting alongside a legion, a weaponized chimera chained directly to your body. And that tether changes every single rule. Wrap it around enemies to bind them, yank yourself across gaps, time your dodges into chain counters that freeze the battlefield for a punishing follow-up. 5 completely distinct legions keep the whole system endlessly surprising. Sword, arrow, beast, arm, axe. Each one fighting completely differently and opening up entirely new tactical possibilities on the fly. Sync attacks chain your strikes with your legions into these jaw-dropping combo finishes that make every single fight feel like a highlight reel. 3 weapon types shifting your combat rhythm on top of that, the deeper you go, the more layers reveal themselves. And that's exactly why players keep coming back. This is the kind of combat system that other action games spend years trying to replicate. What if every single battle felt like a chess match, where one wrong move didn't just cost you the fight, but unraveled the entire campaign you spent the last hour planning? That's exactly the kind of tension Final Fantasy Tactics: The Evilest Chronicles delivers. The combat is built on an isometric grid, where terrain, elevation, and even weather genuinely change the outcome of every encounter. Higher ground extends attack range, line of sight determines whether your spells land, and repositioning a single unit at the wrong moment can collapse a strategy you carefully constructed from the start. Nothing here is decorative, every element feeds directly into how battles play out. What makes it truly dangerous for your free time though is the job system sitting underneath all of that. Characters begin as basic squires before branching into knights, wizards, ninjas, dragoons, and beyond, with each class teaching transferable skills that can be equipped across any other job. Train a time mage to unlock haste, reassign that ability to a ninja, and suddenly you've engineered a self-built assassin that the game never explicitly told you was possible. That loop of experimentation and discovery is what keeps pulling you back. The Evilest Chronicles wraps all of that in a genuinely impressive set of modern upgrades. Fast forward battles, autosave, a clearer job progression tree, full voice acting, and a difficulty slider that broadens accessibility without ever softening the real challenge. The infamous V-Graph rooftop duel is still punishing. The political storyline about class warfare and institutional corruption still hits harder than most modern RPGs. And the whole package feels more complete than ever before on a Nintendo platform. Nearly 30 years old, and nothing has come close to replicating it since. That alone tells you everything. Look, if you've ever wanted a combat system that just completely takes over your brain, Neo: The World Ends With You on Switch is genuinely something else. Every single party member equips a pin, and each pin unleashes a completely different ability. Spam it, charge it, hold it, each one behaves differently and hits differently, meaning your entire battle strategy shifts depending on what you've got slotted. And you're juggling all of this simultaneously across multiple characters while dodging a screen absolutely packed with enemy attacks. The chaos is the point. It's loud, it's frantic, and it is completely exhilarating once everything clicks together. The pin variety alone will have you hunting down every last one just to see what breaks the game next. Throw in a clothing system that stacks bonus abilities on top of your stats when your style rating is high enough, and a food upgrade loop that lets you fine-tune the whole squad between fights, and the pre-battle preparation becomes just as addictive as the combat itself. Visually, it pops like nothing else on the platform too, with attack animations that make every single encounter feel like a street art fever dream. The original World Ends With You built a legendary reputation on its combat alone. Neo takes that foundation and cranks the sheer scale of it up dramatically. Pure handheld chaos at its absolute finest. Alright, so if someone asked me to pick the single most unhinged, over-the-top, face-melting combat experience on Switch, Bayonetta 3 wins without breaking a sweat. And here's why. The moment you start chaining weapon combos together, Demon Masquerade kicks in automatically at the end of your sequences, giant fists erupting from nowhere, stingers crashing down, and it feels like the game is rewarding you just for playing aggressively. Then, Demon Slave flips everything upside down, letting you pilot kaiju-sized demons across the battlefield with their own dedicated attack sets. But there's genuine risk attached. Leave Bayonetta exposed too long and the whole thing collapses, which keeps every single encounter demanding your full attention. Each demon also transforms how you physically move through stages. Wall crawling, free flight, launching across massive distances, meaning traversal and combat become one completely fluid thing rather than two separate ideas. Switch between Bayonetta and Viola and suddenly the whole rhythm shifts again with an entirely fresh playstyle. 3 playable characters, dozens of weapon combinations, and a demon roster that fundamentally rewrites the rules every time you swap. The combo ceiling here is genuinely staggering. Pure weaponized chaos wrapped in the slickest action game the Switch has ever seen. So here's one that might raise some eyebrows on this list. Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen. Originally dropped back in 2012, and yet the combat still embarrasses games releasing today. Here's what makes it stick. The director cut his teeth on Devil May Cry, and that DNA runs through every single encounter. Weak attacks chain into heavy strikes, building into genuinely jaw-dropping combo sequences that feel weighty and earned rather than button mashy. 4 vocation skills mapped to the shoulder buttons give every fight this beautiful layer of resource management. Unleash them too recklessly and your stamina crumbles, leaving you completely exposed. Then climbing happens. Spotting a Cyclops, sprinting toward it and just scaling the thing while hacking away at weak points. It never stops being spectacular. Your 3 pawn companions amplify everything further, locking enemies in place while you carve through them, or drawing aggro while you line up a skill. Swap vocations entirely whenever the mood strikes and the whole combat rhythm reshapes itself around something fresh. This is a game where every enemy encounter feels like a physics sandbox, where you're discovering new interactions constantly. On Switch specifically, it runs beautifully, meaning all of that chaos is fully portable. A 12-year-old action RPG that still outpunches most of what surrounds it. That tells you everything. Okay, so this one might genuinely surprise you. The Last Remnant Remastered is sitting on Switch quietly doing something no other JRPG on the platform attempts, and nowhere near enough people are talking about it. The entire foundation of this game is commanding your own small army across a battlefield, and the tactical positioning of every unit fundamentally shifts what options become available to you each turn. Push aggressively and your choices reflect that. Pull back into a supporting role and an entirely different set of commands unlocks. Get 2 formations deadlocked against each other and suddenly you're making these split-second calls about whether to break formation, reinforce allies, or capitalize on the opening. Every decision cascades into the next in ways that feel genuinely surprising. And once the systems click, because there is a learning curve worth pushing through, the strategic depth that opens up is seriously rewarding. The remaster layers a battle speed multiplier on top of everything too, meaning grinding never outstays its welcome and the pacing stays crisp throughout. It runs cleanly on Switch, which matters because you will be sinking serious hours into army building, weapon upgrading, and chasing down side content that keeps expanding the further you push. For JRPG fans wanting something that genuinely thinks differently about large-scale tactical combat, this one deserves way more attention than it gets. Every JRPG list on the platform includes Final Fantasy VII Remake, and veterans of these videos already know exactly why. But the Switch 2 release reframes the entire conversation. This is the version that makes one of the most mechanically ambitious RPGs ever constructed fully portable, and that alone changes everything. The ATB system sits at the heart of why this combat is so compulsive. Aggressive real-time pressure builds gauge, then time effectively stops while you strategize across your whole squad, queuing abilities, spells, and limit breaks with surgical precision before diving straight back into the chaos. Cloud, Tifa, and Barret each control so distinctly they might as well belong to separate titles entirely. Cycling between them mid-encounter while tracking a shared tactical layer creates this constant mental juggling act that never loses its grip. The bundled Yuffie expansion shakes up the rhythm further, with a shuriken-based system that completely dismantles whatever habits you built across the main campaign. Visually, it holds its ground against console versions in ways that genuinely defy expectations. Load times are essentially gone, and optional assist features let returning players cut straight to what matters. With the trilogy conclusion drawing closer, this 2-game portable package carrying the full foundation of that story represents the clearest argument for jumping in right now. Romancing Saga 2: Revenge of the Seven has a combat-style permanence mechanic that changes how every single battle feels. Characters who fall in combat lose life points, and when those run out, they are gone. Not resting, not injured, gone forever. That weight transforms routine encounters into these tense, calculated moments where aggression needs to constantly be balanced against survival. Speed stats determine turn order, weaknesses demand to be identified and exploited, and crowd control through status effects becomes less of an optional strategy and more of a lifeline. The cascade effect of losing even one unit mid-battle is immediately felt. Less damage output, more punishment absorbed, mounting pressure snowballing fast. Rather than frustrating, each setback fuels this forward-thinking mentality where every defeat teaches you something worth carrying into the next run. The weapon and magic rotation system builds your kingdom's overall strength between battles too, meaning preparation outside of combat directly shapes how capable your squad becomes inside it. New Game Plus then stacks 2 additional difficulty tiers on top for veterans chasing punishment. Ranked alongside Chrono Trigger and Persona 4 by people who know the genre deeply, that's the company this one keeps. On Switch, it runs beautifully, and that permanence system makes it nearly impossible to put down. What if a turn-based RPG respected your time so much that it drops you straight into a massive battlefield within the first few minutes? No lengthy tutorials, no hand-holding, just pure chaos from the jump. That's Chained Echoes, and that confidence in its own systems is completely justified. Battles move at a pace that genuinely shocks you coming from the genre. Attacks land, counters fly back, the whole exchange resolves in seconds rather than minutes. The overdrive mechanic layers tactical decision making on top of that speed, and spotting enemies freely on the overworld means every engagement feels like a deliberate choice rather than an interruption. Then the skill architecture opens up and the whole thing transforms. Each character carries 48 unlockable abilities split across action skills, passive bonuses, and raw stat growth, and every single unlock physically reshapes that character's numbers alongside adding new combat options. 12 distinct weapon categories across the roster mean party customization spirals into something genuinely absorbing. Then the mechs arrive and rewrite the rules entirely all over again. For a 16-bit styled RPG sitting at a budget price point, the sheer volume of interlocking systems packed in here rivals titles charging 3 times as much. Between 30 and 50 hours of content depending on how deep the party building rabbit hole pulls you, and it will pull hard. One of the most underrated combat sandboxes the Switch library holds. A full weekend absorbed before you realize what happened. That's the Unicorn Overlord effect, and the combat system is entirely responsible. Here's the genius of it. Battles run as simulations. Your squad compositions, equipment loadouts, and pre-assigned tactical behaviors determine everything before the first strike lands. Sounds passive, right? Wrong. Because the preparation phase becomes this deeply satisfying strategic puzzle where every decision compounds. Pair the wrong unit types together and watch your carefully constructed plan collapse in seconds. Nail the matchups and the whole engagement resolves like clockwork. The Gambit-style conditional system on higher difficulties lets you essentially program your soldiers, defining priority targets, trigger conditions, ability sequences, turning your army into a precision instrument rather than a blunt weapon. Over 60 recruitable characters spanning wildly different classes create near infinite squad combinations, and discovering which pairings absolutely break encounters never stops feeling rewarding. An open world structure means tackling the campaign in whatever sequence makes sense to you, with side missions that carry genuine moral weight and directly shape your roster. The strategic layer deepens so gradually that the full complexity only becomes visible around the 30-hour mark, and by then you're already completely committed. On Switch, it performs flawlessly. Menus stay sharp and readable, and the whole experience begs to be played portably. A masterclass in making deep strategy feel completely natural. And wrapping up this list is a title that absolutely had to be here. Nier Automata on Switch is one of those experiences that defies easy categorization, and the combat is a massive reason why. You're simultaneously managing melee weapons, a pod companion firing projectiles and special attacks, dodging, jumping, and repositioning, all happening at once in this beautifully chaotic dance that demands constant attention. The game then casually shifts into side-scrolling shoot-'em-up sections mid-adventure, where your mech transitions between planes, enemies attack from every direction, and a melee option enters the mix. The chip customization system underneath all of that lets you sculpt 2B into exactly the kind of fighter you want, boosting specific stats, adding regenerative properties, even reshaping the interface itself to suit your playstyle. Boss encounters are pure spectacle, and the combat's frenetic energy pairs with one of the greatest video game soundtracks ever composed, in a way that makes every single fight feel cinematic. Multiple story routes mean the whole thing rewards replaying, with each path revealing layers the previous one deliberately left hidden. On Switch specifically, it holds up beautifully, a genuinely unmissable action RPG. Fire Emblem Three Houses makes you genuinely care about every unit on the battlefield, and that emotional investment is exactly what makes the combat so addictive. Permadeath in Classic Mode means every positioning mistake carries real consequences. Losing a character you spent dozens of hours developing hits hard in a way most games never pull off. Divine Pulse softens that edge just enough by rewinding a limited number of turns, letting you correct catastrophic errors without ever fully killing the tension. 5 weapon categories each pack unique combat arts that trade durability for powerful bonuses like critical rate spikes or extra damage against aerial units, so every loadout decision actually matters going into a fight. Layer battalions on top of that, squads of soldiers assigned to individual units, contributing passive buffs and gambit attacks that stagger enemies and chain across nearby targets when allies are properly positioned. And the tactical depth just keeps expanding. Throw in terrain hazards, elevation advantages, and increasingly complex branching battlefield layouts, and later missions demand genuine strategic thinking rather than just charging forward. What really seals it though is how the monastery life feeds directly into all of this. Every lesson planned, every bond strengthened outside of combat makes your squad meaningfully stronger inside it. 4 distinct routes and over 80 hours of content later, this remains one of the most compulsive tactical experiences the Switch has ever seen. Look, there are games I revisit every few years, and Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age is permanently on that list. One of my all-time favourites in the entire genre, and the Switch version makes it impossible to stop playing. The Gambit system sits at the heart of why this combat is so endlessly compelling. Programming each party member with conditional behaviours that execute automatically mid-battle creates this deeply satisfying feeling of watching a perfectly engineered machine run at full speed. But the real genius is that the Zodiac Age layers a dual-job license board on top of everything, letting you combine 2 completely different class paths per character into builds that genuinely feel like your own creation. The license reset function means experimenting with wild combinations carries 0 permanent consequences. Swap freely, rebuild entirely, and discover synergies that make previously brutal encounters suddenly trivial. A speed multiplier keeps the pacing crisp whether you're grinding optional content or blazing through story sections. And New Game Plus throws even more replayability on top for anyone chasing the game's legendary super bosses. Portable access to one of the most politically rich, lore-dense worlds Final Fantasy ever constructed. Ivalice is simply something else. Every time the gambit system fits into a perfect rhythm and your party dismantles a tough fight flawlessly, that feeling never gets old. Never will. Kunitsugami, Path of the Goddess, builds this brilliantly tense loop around two distinct phases that constantly feed into each other. Daytime is pure preparation, sprinting across the level, gathering resources, and assigning villagers to specific combat roles before the sun drops. Then nightfall hits, and demons pour through gates from every direction, while you're simultaneously executing sword combos as so, repositioning troops mid-battle, and protecting Yashiro from getting overwhelmed. The real hook is how those two phases never stop feeling equally important. Every upgrade unlocked between sequences directly sharpens what you can pull off when the chaos starts. Just as the mechanics click and a rhythm develops, a boss completely dismantles your strategy and forces a fresh approach in an entirely new setting, keeping the whole experience perpetually surprising rather than repetitive. Levels set across boats, open fields, and winding mountain paths each reshape how positioning and combat flow work, meaning the tactical thinking required constantly evolves. New Game Plus and escalating difficulty tiers extend everything further for players chasing mastery. Wrapped inside a visual style that genuinely looks like nothing else on the platform, this is exactly the kind of wildly creative swing that deserves way more attention than it gets. So what makes Shin Megami Tensei 5 one of the most addictive combat experiences on Switch? It comes down to the press turn system, and once it clicks, every single battle becomes this razor-sharp tactical puzzle. Exploit an enemy weakness and you earn extra turns. Waste an action or miss an attack and your turns vanish instantly. That constant risk-reward calculation keeps every encounter demanding full concentration. The Magatsuhi gauge builds alongside that, either stacking defensive buffs each round or getting burned on one devastating offensive surge that can completely flip a difficult fight. Over 200 recruitable demons mean your party composition possibilities are genuinely staggering, and negotiating mid-battle to convince enemies to switch sides rather than just destroying them adds this brilliant layer of in-combat decision making. Essences let you freely redistribute skills and reshape elemental affinities across your entire squad between encounters, so adapting to whatever the next area throws at you feels organic rather than restrictive. The Miracle upgrade system then expands everything further, unlocking new battle actions, broadening affinities, growing your demon roster capacity, rewarding exploration directly with combat power. Stronger enemy variants scattered across the open world act as benchmarks, basically daring you to come back 5 hours later with a squad worthy of the challenge. Brutal, beautiful, and endlessly replayable, SMT5 earns its place on this list without question.
That concludes our episode for the day. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive a notification about the latest game deals and updates. Thank you for tuning in. See you in the next video.